Welcome to Lighting the Educational Flame, created and produced by educator and author Mark Hoberman, owner and director of Grade Success Tutoring. Mark will be joined by Susan Brender, CEO and host of The Susan Brender Show. The purpose of this program is to offer our listeners a variety of stories dealing with many interesting topics surrounding education. It is our hope that students and parents alike will benefit from the wide range of topics, including study skills, test prep, anti-bullying, sports, music, and more. We hope you enjoy our show, Lighting the Educational Flame.
Hello and welcome to the talk show, Lighting the Educational Flame, brought to you by Grade Success Education. I'm Mark Hoberman, and my co-host, as always, is Susan Brender. How you doing today, Susan?
It's a pleasure to be on the show with you again, and I always will say this to you, Mark. You are great, and it's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. I'll send you the money later.
You know, Mark, I want to ask you something. You know, I have a friend whose son has Asperger's. Now, it's on the spectrum. Asperger's is really low on the spectrum. But the most amazing thing is that he was awful. I mean, he couldn't be controlled. And now, Mark, he's a comedian. And it's saved his life, literally saved his life. People with autism have a lot of issues. And I'll tell you this much. We are going to really discuss what we can do about it, okay?
And absolutely. We have a great guest today, but I have to tell you, I've tutored students with Asperger's, some on the spectrum. I've taught in classes also, and it really depends on the support that you get and the information that you get. And you have to be armed with the right information and the right people. And our guest today is definitely a specialist in that, and she's going to speak to us about that in a minute. So let's bring her on. Our guest today is the founder of Space of Mind, Ali Kaufman. Ali, welcome to Lighting the Educational Flame.
Thank you.
Ali, could you tell our viewers when you first became interested in the field of education?
Probably when I was a little kid. I used to play school all the time with my friends, but I just had amazing educators, and my mom is an educator, so I think it just was always there.
What did your mom taught?
Yeah, my mom taught pre-K for 32 years. She just retired.
Tough group.
Yes, yeah. For sure.
My wife worked with them too.
Yeah, but professionally, I guess, you know, I imagined that I would go into youth programming and education was sort of always my goal in choosing my major for college and everything. So it took a little different path than what I expected, but it probably was always there.
Ali, let me ask you something. Why did you choose to work with people with autism? They need so much help, and there's so many issues that they have, and working with them must be very tough. So why did you choose that?
Well, we work with everyone. I didn't set out to create a company that works with any one particular audience. In fact, I started the company working with adults and then moved to working with families. But my experience with people who live on the spectrum is, you know, both personal and professional, a long time. And I was working with a few families up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, when I, you know, was doing a whole other career. But as a side, you know, other job, I was coaching some families who were dealing with hoarding and extreme anxiety and autism and test anxiety. And so I've always had a really great connection with people who are outside of the box in terms of how their brains are wired or how they learn or create or show up in the world. But Space of Mind is really for everybody. We do have a sweet spot in working with students and adults who are on the autism spectrum, because we don't approach anything from a traditional standpoint. We meet everyone where they are, and we are able to create a nurturing and safe, loving and celebratory environment, right? Like as Maslow says, you know, we need safe, loved, and celebrated, and so that reduces a lot of the sort of autistic behaviors that can come up in other traditional settings So we're able to just really tap into the whole person in a much different way. We also don't approach, our reactions to outside of the norm behaviors that maybe come from anxiety or obsessive, tendencies, or just having a busy brain. We don't approach our reactions from a disciplinary standpoint. We approach them from a discovery standpoint. So I think just our vision and mission are so rooted in things outside of labels. It's just about who the person is that we're working with at the time. But certainly, while I didn't set out to be any type of a special needs program, we are able to accommodate many special needs because of our personal approach and our customized approach.
Well, it
But we
sounds,
also,
I'm sorry.
oh, sorry.
I was going to say, it sounds like your philosophy is kind of a different approach than traditional education also. And I noticed that you call your team members coaches instead of
Yes.
what we normally hear as teachers. So I think the shift in the name was very interesting to me. So what is the difference between coaches and teachers?
Well, so I started my career as an ADHD executive functioning organizing coach. And life coaching is at the root of everything we're doing, whether it's life skills, social emotional skills. But the role of a coach is a partner. And a teacher is typically somebody who is walking into the room as the known subject matter expert. And they're there to impart knowledge. A coach is more of a dedicated guide, I suppose, a partner in discovering the knowledge. So the coach just joins our clients, our students, our parents, whomever on the path, and then is really coaching to create strategies that fit a unique way of being on the path. So by creating the role of educator in our schoolhouse program and creating the company as a coaching company, the first services I offered was individual coaching. I worked with CEOs, and I worked with hoarders, and I worked with parents, and I worked with kids, and then the schoolhouse program created itself out of that when I saw that school related stress was this problem that needed to be solved in the home. So when you're a coach, you're also not coming from a therapeutic clinical type place that tends to eliminate people who might not associate themselves with needing therapeutic services or having any type of desire to do that. So when I would meet with families and I would walk in as the coach, I would get full engagement from every family member because coaches aren't seen as in the same vein as therapy could, which tends to trigger anxiety or defensiveness. Coaching is more of an all-encompassing approach. So it just seems like, and there's some mentorship. Like if you think about if a camp counselor and an educator were merged and you throw a little lunch lady in there and a little, guide and mentor, it's all in one, but we're also on a first name basis. So it's like, I spent 17 summers at sleepaway camp, and that camp counselor role is really, you're a partner, but you're not like a teacher is, it just feels like there's another layer between the relationship.
Allie, let me ask you something. People don't really understand autism. How is it diagnosed? How do people find out? They see their child, the child's not looking at them. The child is sitting on the floor. It's not engaged with other people. How do they know that it's autism?
Well, so autism isn't any one thing. It's a spectrum of things. And, there's the diagnostics for autism are generally a collaborative of insight. And so, obviously getting a therapeutic assessment is going to collect data from the different places that child and different relationships rather that the child has. So understanding how they are in a classroom setting or a home setting, or where, because behaviors may be different. For example, we have a student right now who is being assessed, and the home observations were quite different than the observations that our coaches were making in the assessment. And so the therapist who was doing the testing actually called to verify that we were doing it on the right kid, because what we saw in school was so different than what they had experienced in school previously, and certainly what's experienced at home. So, that's why getting as much data as possible is important. But autism can present so differently in anyone, but also in boys versus girls. And it's trickier to diagnose in girls. And with boys, it typically shows up with more early behaviors that, but social cues, sensory sensitivity, sometimes food and feeding issues, or obsessive or anxious tendencies, those can all be symptoms of being, or signals of being on the spectrum. But autism, like ADHD, like different mood disorders, they're all stress triggered. So symptoms, or signs show up in different ways under different stressful conditions. So that's
This
why
is
looking
different
at it
ages too. This spans different age
Right.
groups.
Absolutely.
Because I know you mentioned stress a lot, but I like what I see in your school is that you specialize in stressed out families, and people would think it's stressed out kids. And the fact that it's
Right.
stressed out families, and I have that all the times with kids I tutor, and they don't have test anxiety. They have parents who breathe down their necks every 5 seconds.
Correct.
So
And so that's the most important thing, is that, we're parents, when I first started the company, were calling me, can you fix my kid? And they're putting all the pressure on a child to create fixes for systems that are broken, whether it's the school's system or the family system. You can't ask a child to be responsible for success when those other systems are not doing things to make things better also. So
Mark,
I think you're right.
I'm sorry, Ali, for interrupting you.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
One of the things that I find very interesting is that a lot of people, they associate autism with a lot of the movies that they see about it, okay? And Dustin Hoffman was a perfect example, who was a savant, okay? And he really, was weird. I'm just going to say that word, weird. Do you see, or can you relate to some of the movies that really show what autism is?
Yeah, one of the greatest examples of that I've seen on screen is the show Atypical.
I
Which is
was
a
just going to bring
Netflix
that up because that looks more real to me.
It's
from what
much
I've
more
seen.
realistic. Like, yes, there are, like, the circumstances Dustin Hoffman's character went through in that movie, Rain Man, also had a lot to do with trauma. So, I think there is right now, we were talking about stress a minute ago, everyone is stressed. And it's fair to say that COVID is even causing trauma.
Right.
So I think there's going to be a lot of things that come up in the next year or so that will look like something it might not be. Like we've got so many people have been indoors and isolated for so long. So there's going to be anxiety, separation anxiety, and agoraphobia, and like all of these things that we're not used to seeing in kids. And it could be traced back to the stressful moment we're in with COVID,
Sure.
but it could be misconstrued as being a developmental situation. So trauma and stress and different brain wiring, neurodevelopmental conditions, they all look very similar. Right. PTSD, it looks, your working memory is affected through PTSD the same way as it is with ADHD. And with anxiety, if you're on the autism spectrum and something triggers you, you can't access any information in your mind because the stress has gone so high, so your working memory has gone so low. So I think, when we look at those types of behaviors like you see in Rain Man, or other, character traits that we know from characters we've seen on TV related to autism, we have to look at what's triggering those moments where we see those characteristics come up, because stress and anxiety is what's doing it. But that we have at Space of Mind in our schoolhouse program, a handful of students who at times have exhibited those behaviors more upon joining us than once they've settled in. But because we've created an environment where everyone's entitled to have a stressful meltdown on some level, whether you're neurotypical or not, there, we all get stressed and lose our cool at times. So we've just created an environment where that's fine, do your thing, have your moment. Nobody's going to judge or hold it against you. We're just going to help preserve your dignity while you're in that moment. And so when we've had a student who's on the spectrum have a full-on meltdown because they don't want to clean up a mess or do something that they don't want to do, and there's a loud shriek or a series of those or whatever the behavior is, and if it's disruptive, it's related to the culture and the community that behavior is exhibited in as to whether or not it's considered weird.
Is there a difference between how you deal with someone who shrieks who's 6 or 8 versus 15?
I'm sorry, a giant bus just went by. What did you ask?
Yes. So is there a difference between how you handle a student who shrieks at 6 or 7 or even 8 versus someone at 15 who's exhibiting the same behavior?
That's a really good question. Initially, no. Our mission is to preserve dignity, first and foremost. So we would do that at any age. If someone's having a moment, we're either going to move them. If it's not possible to move them, we're going to move whoever's around them to give them their space to have their moment. Because if we're de-escalating, we can't do that with an audience. It's not fair to we can't expect someone's stress level to go down if they're feeling watched or unsafe. So the first thing we would do is, it doesn't matter about age, but, yeah, I mean, like anything, there's a different way you would adjust your language, or your tone, but I actually don't know if that has as much to do with age, especially with autism, because social and emotional ages, when you're dealing with attention and anxiety stuff, doesn't really correlate to chronological age. So I think it's more about adjusting to the moment if you don't know the child, or adjusting to the child first and then the moment. But, it's really about, if you don't know who you're dealing with, it's about trial and error to figure out what yesterday was our first day back after winter break, and we had a student who's actually on the spectrum, got out of the car. I could see mom's look on her face. It was a rough drive to school. Yeah. He got out of the car. He looked pissed. And so before I asked him what's wrong, I complimented him on his socks. And so we ended up having like a 2-minute conversation about his socks, which took him off guard. And he forgot for a minute that he was as angry as he was. So I was able to then say, I saw you got out of the car looking a little upset. Is there something that we should work on before the day starts? And we were able to come up with a solution in like 30 seconds. But if I had hit him with that initially, he would have given me everything he prepared for in the car.
Are you suggesting that some of the students who you have in your program exhibit certain behaviors, and if they want to go to, I'm thinking if they're older and they want to go to college, for example, can they fit in, and how does that happen?
Well, yeah. First of all, anyone who wants to go to college should go to college. There's schools for everybody. And one thing that we do specialize in is college placement for teens that are outside of the box. But schools now are really prepared to handle students who learn alternatively. Mm-hmm. And so more colleges have more services. And a big part of what we do is prepare our kids to be advocates. So, and to accept help and know when to ask for it and know how to receive it is a big skill. It's just knowing how to receive the help, not just how to ask for it. But in terms of, matching a student with whatever their post-high school life is going to be, we really start looking at that in like 9th grade. helping students find their purpose is such a big part of that. So if by the time they've graduated, they have a passion or an understanding of their purpose, it's easier to figure out what's next. But it's also super important to make sure all the independent living skills are there. And that's true for anyone, right? Like I would say it's actually more true for the neurotypical kids to focus on their independent living skills than the non-neurotypical kids, the neurodiverse kids, because the parents of the neurodiverse kids have been preparing for certain milestones for a long, long time with a specific set of strategies and sometimes multiple professionals to hit a target date. Right. But the parents of neurotypical kids tend to be focused more on the academic success of their child than enabling them to be independent in the life and social and emotional skills areas. So I think that that's been very true for us. But right. As far as succeeding in post-high school, I think that people on the spectrum probably tend to do better in the real world than they do in a K-12 environment, because once we graduate high school, there's no time clock over our head saying you have to meet this milestone at this time. It's right. Only when we're kindergarten through 12th grade and you're expected to be every year, there's level standards and, you know, all of this stuff. Yeah. So I think that when you're on the spectrum, the gift that most people with autism have is that they know their passion. They understand their purpose on a very cellular level from a very early age. And once we graduate high school, you just go out and find your people. And so I've found that, you know, the kids and young adults that we've worked with over the years who are on the spectrum, like they're very comfortable to go out and find their people. Like these kids will go to a Comic-Con conference alone. I wouldn't even do that, right? Yeah. Like there's a whole other level of, because they don't overthink certain social pieces, that are easier to go out in the world and just find the people who are like you and who are into what you're into. So I think there's almost an advantage because there's less of a concern of what other people think than what neurotypical post-high school kids have, who are just figuring out who to be friends with based on how many likes they get on Instagram.
Right. Well, you also talk about reaching out into the world. And we know now the world is not as it was in the past. How has COVID-19 impacted your ability to help and reach these young people and their families through these stressful times?
Yeah, so it's been interesting. We actually, when we took the schoolhouse virtual in spring, we had meaningful education for all of our kids throughout that quarter. And so, so that was really amazing. And we launched our virtual program nationally for this fall so that we could reach more families in other places. So that's been really exciting for us. Obviously, with our in-person programs, like everyone, things have been a little different.
Very much.
And just managing the operations of staying open and, you know, running the schoolhouse program on campus has been a lot. So we've sort of just changed really our priorities in the last semester to get through this, but I feel like we've just rounded the corner. For a few months, everything was sort of stagnant. Parents weren't looking to add more change to anyone's experience, and a lot of parents, I think, have just resigned that this year is going to be a wash.
Right.
And so so I think that it was a lot of patience, a lot of faith that like this moment will end, we'll round the corner, things will open up, and we'll be able to take what we've learned through COVID and apply it. And yep. We opened to distance learners in the fall. So we supported about 25 students who were enrolled in public school, but came to us where we oversaw their distance learning through, Google Classroom to their public school. So we had a bird's eye view through this to what that was doing to these kids, how the teachers were handling it, how the parents were handling it. And, by the second week, we had 4 kids that developed visible physical tics from the stress of just 1 week of distance learning.
Right.
So for us, I think as a company, my team and I have been focused on just learning what the market is now, what education, the state of the industry and the state of students' abilities right now. We forget that these kids are stressed, and we are still giving them a similarly even worse, it's a more watered down, bland, less personalized version, right, of education, because it hasn't, in most schools, not our program's been doing what we do, but public school isn't able to deliver the type of education that kids are used to. So there are losses that are happening, but the losses are happening across a lot of planes. And I think that this is going to take a long time to recover from. And I haven't seen the educational system, meaning that system of expectations, of milestones that need to be met, I haven't seen that start to shift yet. It seems like there's just been a lot of plugging of holes and trying to react in the moment, but it doesn't seem like we're using this opportunity to make longer term gains.
Right.
We're almost done, Mark, right?
Yeah.
But I'm interested in a story that you can tell us that really kind of gives our audience an idea that there is possibilities for success, that people don't have to be so afraid of kids with autism or teens with autism.
Oh.
So if you have a story to tell that is kind of upbeat, I'd like to hear it.
Okay, so let me come up with a good one. I've got a bunch.
Sure.
I'll give you a great one. So we have a student who was with us. He was our youngest student. He joined at age 9, and he was in our program through 12th grade. So he joined as a 4th grader. And in my hold on, guys. He joined as a 4th grader, and I have it. Just kidding. And he was in a rough spot. He had been bullied mercilessly. Sorry, my computer's about to die. I had to do an emergency charge. He was really struggling. He had been bullied. He had written a suicide letter on a Post-it note at age 9, and they needed an alternative. And at this time, we hadn't had a student under, I think, 7th grade. So they came in, and bless you. They came in, and obviously we took one look at this child, and we were like, yes, you need to be here. And I remember he cried walking into the building. And when we sat down, he told his parents, like, what do I need to do? I need to be here. And we went on a journey with this family for, the almost 10 years that they were with us. That at times, in the early times, we worked with him to understand his dark side, which a lot of people on the spectrum have, because they're deep thinkers. Anxiety, it comes from the amount of information you can take in. That's the amount of possibilities of things that could potentially happen. That's the amount of anxiety that you can create. So this is a kid who was like a really old soul, and he had created a lot of ideas of what could possibly happen. And so anyway, story short, one of his main issues as a really little kid was he didn't understand the need for people. He didn't need friends. He had his family, and that was it. He was going to work in an isolated job, and he didn't know why he needed to be social, or like, who needs friends? And this was like a belief system he held for a couple of years. Well, wouldn't you know it, by the time this kid graduated from high school, he was the most popular, loyal friend of the bunch. He's thriving in college, making friends with professors and peers. He even, when I talked to him about a month into school, I was like, well, what do you do like during the day? He's like, well, when I have nothing to do, I just walk around campus and I look for somebody to talk to, and like look for a new friend to meet. So, I think it all comes down, of course, and I can give you tons of stories like that, we tend to, as humans, through human nature, judge people by their darkest side and by the scariest characteristics that we see, the ones that we don't want to see in ourselves. But the reality is that those characteristics only come up in moments of fear. And so if you can reduce that fear with nurturing and a safe environment, then anybody can it's human nature to be open to people. But he was ultimately just afraid of people, didn't know what to do with them. So yeah, that's a good story.
Certainly a great success story, and I'm sure there are many. So speaking of that, where can people go to find out more about you and the services you offer?
Awesome. Our website is findspaceofmind.com, and we're on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all of those places. So I think you can just put in Space of Mind and we'll pop up. But yeah, and our phone number is 561-894-8772.
Thank you. I'll be sure to get that in the edits. Ali, really, Susan and I can't thank you enough for joining us today and sharing your vast experiences with our viewers, because they all learn new things and not just the stigmas. So thank you so much for that. And to our viewers, remember to reach out to us on social media. Look for Great Success on Facebook and Twitter. You can, we'd love to hear from you. You can always find me, Mark Hoberman, on LinkedIn. Again, thanks to Ali Kaufman for being with us today. Susan, as always, thank you. And viewers, don't forget to tune in to our next show. This is Mark Hoberman thanking you for watching Lighting the Educational Flame on the Great Success Education channel. Have a great day. Ali, really, thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Lighting the Educational Flame with Mark Hoberman. To contact Mark, email him at info@gradesuccess.com.